Okay. All right, it should be on.
No,
Excellent.
it's not.
I believe we are live at this point in time.
Live.
Do we have a thumbs up, Dr. King?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third panel discussion this evening, and diving into some uncomfortable conversations. This evening we are going to be talking about creating solutions, and we have an awesome panel lined up for you tonight. The idea of this whole series is to engage in civil discourse. Our country is going through an awful lot right now, and at times we seem to have lost our way in being able to have a civil discourse and grow and learn from each other. And the idea is to share perspectives, take a deeper dive into what is happening in our country, and to look at some solutions specifically tonight. In co-hosting this event, I have the very good Dr. Tim King, who is joining us, and we have a wonderful panel set up. I will share very briefly Carmen Gray, who was set to join us tonight, and we had a great discussion with Carmen last night. Unfortunately, had emergency dental surgery this afternoon and will not be able to join us. So we want to wish her well. Maybe we will have an additional conversation after this where she can come back and join us, and we can share some information on the solutions she has come up with. And so, Tim, if you would like to introduce yourself, and then we can go right into the panel and allow the panel to introduce themselves as well.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Tim King, a former Director of Special Education for Flagler, current statewide program director for SETNet, and I am excited to hear our conversation tonight.
Excellent. Neelan, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me here. My name is Neelan Joseph. I am a first-generation American. My family's from Trinidad and Tobago. 10-year Air Force combat veteran, background in law enforcement and security, hold degrees in criminal justice, psychology, and emergency and disaster management. I'm currently employed by Flagler County as an emergency management planner.
Excellent. Thank you. And Honorable Commissioner John Rogers.
Hey, thank you for having me, Honorable Colleen Conklin. Old classmate. Thank you guys for having me. I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Bunnell. I have several different hats. I'm a father and a grandfather to two biracial grandbabies that are absolutely beautiful. And I am a business owner here in Flagler, Volusia, St. Johns County. And I'm the head varsity girls basketball coach at Seabreeze High School, and I'm a youth mentor. And we have a nonprofit that we just started with a bunch of professionals, educational professionals in Flagler, Volusia, and St. Johns County called the Hub, and it just basically is a program to help the kids after high school, after they graduate, try to help them find their why and their what, and try to get them enlisted, enrolled, or employed somewheres. And I appreciate the time for you guys, all y'all, for taking your time out tonight to have this discussion.
Well, we're so glad to have you. Thanks for joining us. And Enosh, would you like to introduce yourself, love?
My name is Enosh. I'm a future author.
So glad to
Very
have you.
outspoken person, young person in Flagler County. I just feel like, well, thank you for having me on here, so I could be that voice for everybody to represent that, that side of the equation. Because I feel like a lot of young people don't let their voices be heard, especially here. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Well, we're excited to have you. I'm so glad you could join us. And Leslie, sir.
Yes, I want to thank you, Colleen, and Dr. Tim, for inviting me to be on this panelist. My name is Leslie Giscombe, and I am the founder and CEO of the African American Entrepreneurs Association. That was founded in 2018, January. And I've been a Palm Coast resident for now 30 years. I think maybe Colleen has probably beat me on that. I'm not sure. But anyway, great to be included in this conversation. Great conversation. Thank you.
So good to have you. And the Honorable Commissioner Ken Bryan. You're muted, sir.
How about that? Is that better?
There you go.
Okay, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a panelist. I'm former Air Force, and I'm also retired from the U.S. Department of Justice, as well as working at the White House. I'm a former county commissioner of St. Johns County, currently city commissioner here in Flagler Beach. Proud to say that I'm the first African-American or first person of color to actually hold an elected position in Flagler Beach. When I was in St. Johns County, I was the second in the history of St. Johns County to be an elected official in the county commission as well. So I've been doing a lot of things in my career. Also mentoring young people, particularly young men, on how to stay alive when they get stopped by police officers. And I did a lot of that with my own son. I had two children that are biracial. They are now grown. I also have a biracial granddaughter, and my daughter has a Native American 5-year-old boy that she recently adopted. Well, she adopted when he was an infant. So looking forward to doing some things here in Flagler Beach, working in Flagler County, and working with the folks in the community to make our community better.
Thank you, Ken. We're very glad to have you. Thank you so much. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Conklin. I'm the vice chair of the Flagler County School Board. And in honor of Carmen, because she's not here this evening, I do want to say Carmen Gray is the mother of Curtis Gray, who many of us who are in our community know tragically was murdered about 1.5 years ago. And Carmen was going to share tonight a little bit about the foundation that she has started in honor of her son, Live Like Curtis, Rise to Greatness. So rise above the violence. So I know she's probably watching, and I just want her to know that we'll share what she is doing and what the foundation is working towards throughout the discussion tonight when it's appropriate. And with that, Dr. King, if you would like to maybe go over the ground rules for the benefit of the audience and for the panelists, that would be great.
Absolutely. So if you've joined us for the first 2 sessions, this one will not be any different as far as expectations. We look forward to conversations. We would like for the conversations to be genuine and to be deep. The panelists will all speak from a perspective and a point of view that's personal to them, but they'll do so in the spirit of trying to get better. And I'll say in love will cover us. In the event that something is said that is offensive, please understand that this is not meant to be offensive or harmful. We want to have a conversation, and we understand that some of it may be sensitive in nature. So we ask that you join us. Any chat conversations, we ask that they remain respectful. We're going to do our best to have time at the end to be able to pull questions out of the chat session so that the panelists will be able to answer them. And again, we look forward to a great conversation tonight.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. And we're going to dive right into our questions so that we do have some time at the end of the evening. And we'll start with our first question, which is what steps can be taken to create an environment where we all thrive? What steps can be taken to create an environment where we all thrive? Dr. King, are you going to pop the questions we'll ask into the
sure
chat?
will. Yes.
Thank you so much. And Neelan, I think you were going to start us off tonight.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things I really think is important is empathy. I believe that there is a lack of empathy for people when it comes to understanding. If you are not sympathetic to what a person's saying, you're not going to listen and fully try to understand where they're coming from. I really think that people have a tendency to listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And when you have that, it's like clockwork. You automatically know what somebody's going to say whenever you throw something in there. For instance, if I say the term white privilege, I can count on both hands about probably what people are going to say against that, why it doesn't exist. But if you sit there and actually try to understand from a different perspective of what we're trying to get across, you'll get a better feeling for what we're really trying to say. White privilege isn't an attack. It's not taking anything away from anyone's hard work. It's really about understanding that you don't face the same hurdles specifically because of the color of your skin. But with that, you also have to look at re-examining what stereotypes, racism, and prejudice are. Really taking a step out of your personal feelings for something and looking at something from another person's point of view. I think it's really important for us to do that. And without that empathy, so much gets lost easily.
So true. So very true. I think empathy is probably one of the most underrated, most valuable skills that we all really should really come to know very well. And I think, John, you were going to share a little bit of, more about this.
Absolutely. And, I agree with Elam. But we got to go a little bit deeper, and we got to understand the culture of where the person comes from. Growing up in New Haven County, Connecticut, my father had a neighborhood bar in New Haven, and in the neighborhood there was Portuguese and Chinese and Dominicans. There was Puerto Ricans, and African Americans. There were all different cultures. There was Italians, and in order to do that, you got to take some time and spend a little time in fellowship with them. And Miss Carmen brought up a great point last night about having lunch with them, having lunch with somebody, getting to know them, personally, over the breaking of the bread, and that's what I think we need to concentrate on is just understanding the other person's perspective. Why did they arrive at that thought? Maybe thinking about where their shoes have been, what they've walked in, what they had to overcome to get to where they're at right now. Unfortunately, some people, their doors are opened easier than others, and it's not fair, but it's real. And you gotta understand, everybody did not come to this country on the same boat, but if we look around, we're all in the same ship now. And the bottom line is we have got to come together as a country, and we got to come together as citizens of this great nation and love one another, because perfect love casts out all fear, and we gotta come together and just stop the violence, stop the nonsense, the foolishness, and come together in love.
Right. And I think last night Carmen was talking a little bit about cultural IQ, really understanding the different and various cultures. And again, it goes back to being able to develop that empathy and that understanding. Is there anybody that wants to add to that?
I do want to add one more thing, that when Carmen was going to talk about cultures, that is the part that I hear the phrase a lot, I don't see color, and I really want to take that away. That needs to go away. Everyone should see color, and that what we need to see is that everyone is different, but it's not about seeing color, it's about seeing color and treating people the same regardless of how they look. That is the very important thing when it comes down to cultures, your heritage, your history, when it comes to everyone. If we don't take that time to really understand who that person is and see them for more than just their skin tone, but understand their entire background, that's important as well. You can't just imagine, say like this, oh, I don't see any difference between anybody. No, we're all different. We're all unique. We all have our quirks. We all have our history. And seeing that is really important, and learning to make sure that you treat everyone the same regardless of the differences that we all have.
So true. Ken, you wanted to share?
Oh, yes, I could
Little louder, Ken.
I think you're covering your mic.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm holding this thing. I was going to share this morning. I actually had breakfast with a gentleman. Still there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And we were talking about Confederate statues and being, the removal of them. And I thought it was very timely because of that. So, we were sharing our different views about the statues themselves and how he felt about them as well as how I felt about them. Mm-hmm. So it was an opportunity for both of us to share and hear again dialogue about our particular feelings, even though they were both different. we were able to actually listen to each other and have a very good conversation about it.
Right. And why do you think, I think, I'll wait on that because I think it's a little bit further down the line. I was just going to ask about the fear about engaging in difficult conversations, right? Why people are so hesitant to engage in those conversations. Like you had a relationship, your friend felt comfortable asking you that question.
He did, but we talked about that, and he said, I've always been afraid to talk about these kinds of things with anyone of color, Black, African American, Black or African American. Again, people feel uncomfortable about those two words. But he said, I feel comfortable talking to you because I know you're not going to attack me, or that you're not going to hold anything against me for expressing my views. So I explained to him, we started talking about the Confederate flag. He said, well, why do you find it offensive? I said, because I look at the Confederate flag just like Jews would look at the swastika, because it has a negative connotation. And I look at the history, and every time I see a Klan meeting or something like this, there was always a Confederate flag. So that's why I had my particular feelings, because there's some inner fear that I have in connection with that.
Right, right. And we talked about that last night, about people being afraid how to reference, do you use the term African American? Do you use the term Black? And that there are multiple ethnicities within our minority populations, right? It's not just one thing or the other, but there is that worry about questioning. Thanks, Ken.
Correct.
Great.
I feel like there's three main things that we need to do that would help contribute to a more comfortable environment for everybody. We've touched on two of them: empathy, understanding, but I feel like we got to talk about accountability too. As an America as a whole, needs to hold themselves accountable for the history of, with them and African Americans in the country. And a lot of the time, especially when in the education system, they kind of sugarcoat the atrocities that happen. A lot of people, like that I've seen in the protests that we had in Flagler Beach, a lot of those people over there kind of like the way they respond is as if they don't understand why people are protesting. It's like they don't understand the history. And same thing how you're saying with your friend with the Confederate flag. He has to hold it, not really himself, but as that culture as a whole. They have to use that understanding and the empathy to understand why they should hold themselves accountable for that, why that Confederate flag makes people feel uncomfortable. Right. The same thing with the police, accountability. There shouldn't be police that's able to, kill people that don't need to be killed with no accountability. No holding anyone responsible for misdeeds, in action that shouldn't be taking place. And that's how I feel like, so to make an environment more comfortable place for everybody as a whole, those are the three main things that we got to work on to really get to the root of the problem. Right. We got to hold misdeeds accountable. We got to hold the history accountable. We have to be understanding for why people feel uncomfortable. We got to be empathetic to understand why people feel uncomfortable. And that's the big lack of empathy, big lack of understanding. And those two things lead to a lack of accountability.
Right. So wise.
Very well said.
Wise young man. It's acknowledgement, right? That history happened, that these things happened.
And not that long ago either.
Sorry.
Right. And Dr. King, I think you're going to navigate us through question number 2.
You're muted.
Yep. Question number 2. What programs and practices need to be strengthened or re-examined? What programs and practices need to be strengthened or re-examined? I'm going to thank Neil, and I think we're going to start with you.
Sure. One thing that I re-examined, I thought about this a lot about today, is we're still dealing with redlining. Even though it was made illegal in the 1970s, that practice still continues today.
Can you define that for the audience? Because I know people have read and heard that redlining mentioned, but could you define for the benefit? I didn't mean to interrupt you, Neil, and I'm so sorry, but could you just define and explain to the audience for their benefit what that actually means?
No problem. Redlining is the practice of where counties, cities, and districts take a specific area and they draw the lines of what is a desirable neighborhood and an undesirable neighborhood. And that plays into everything that deals with those businesses building in, homes that come into that community, tax rates, school systems, all those things come into play when you deal with districts redlining. For instance, in Calhoun County, Florida, just a few years ago during Hurricane Michael, I found out that they had a new school built called Alta High School, or Alta Public School, which is a K through 12 school. When that school was open, they redrew the district lines, and that the majority Black community ended up going to the old high school of Bluntstown, whereas almost the entire of the white community would then go to the brand new K through 12 school. That's an injustice to the entire community, especially the families that live in those minority neighborhoods. Those types of practices are still happening, and you'll see that's why almost in a lot of these, inner city neighborhoods, you'll see a liquor store at every corner. But if you go to the suburbs, just right around the corner, you're not going to find those kinds of things. You're going to see public transportation. You're going to see a lot more resources and funding to go to that. The tax base is higher because the homes are nicer, and it's just a domino effect of everything that goes into that society. And it's basically segregation.
Yep, subtle segregation.
So that needs to change. And we really need to harp on that and reinforce to make sure that those kind of practices aren't happening still. The other thing no, go ahead, Scott, Dr. King.
No, I'm gonna move over. John, I know last night when this subject came up, you had some points for us, and I'll go to you, and then I'll come to Ken.
We the word accountability was mentioned, and Enoch, my hat goes off to you, man. Your future is unbelievable. I see greatness all over you, man. And just keep on doing what you're doing and stay humble. But accountability, and unfortunately, the one that has the gold makes the rules. And I remember years ago, my brother was talking about putting a record service out in Palm Coast, and that was, oh, we don't want that. We don't want that out here, and he was talking about it, and they told him basically, this is our bathtub, and we'll put you wherever you want. And unfortunately, that's happening in America. There's people that are making decisions that are not on the best interest of the community, especially the minority community. And we read about it, but I firmly believe that if we just speak up, everybody says, see something, say something. If you speak up when it's happening and bring some attention to it, I think we can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Bryan.
We were thinking about talking about these last night, and some of the things I was talking about had to do with budgets, because we were discussing the fact that you look at most of the communities and most of the counties, and I can use Flagler County, or I can use Flagler Beach, as well as St. Johns County. And usually on the budgets parts of it, the biggest elephant in the room, as we usually say, are the police budgets and fire departments. So I think that when we start focusing on these particular budgets and see how those particular budgets can be carved out to some degree, or some portions of them, to focus more on training, or actually allocating some of those resources into some areas that would help deal with some of the community problems that we have, it could basically help to implement some programs and different practices that would help get away from the enforcement part of it that is seems to be so severely negative in our communities. Many times you can have an individual that is trained properly, or has basically gone through enough training to understand that you don't necessarily have to pull your gun out or have to use force when you're approaching an individual that may be having an issue that's different from the way that you're typically dealing with it. Again, I was talking to one of my friends today where we're talking about, I think that when it comes to law enforcement, there needs to be more scrutiny with the individuals that are actually being allowed to become police officers. There needs to be a closer psychological profile done on some of these individuals to find out what the real motive behind them being law enforcement is. it shouldn't be just because my father was a law enforcement, my grandfather, and these kinds of things here. We need to focus on what their real motive is. Do they really want to be a service to the community, or do they really want to get in there and to be able to legally knock heads? And I hate to use that kind of expression, but that's what I think we've all seen in many cases.
You know, last night, Tim, I don't mean to interrupt, but last night we had talked a little bit about, you know, the kind of what we're hearing out in social media and in the news across the country about defunding police departments. And I don't believe any of us believe that we need to look at massive defunding of our police officers. And we talked a little bit about that last night. So I'm just prodding you to revisit that so we can share some of the thoughts that we're sharing.
Yeah, Nillen.
Yes, so I come from a law enforcement background, so before anyone jumps on me for what things I say, I don't necessarily agree fully with defunding law enforcement. I do think that we do need to allocate additional resources into social workers and take some of the weight and the strain of public service off law enforcement's hands. Cops are asked to deal with way too much on a regular basis, and that's not fair to them. It's challenging, it's strenuous, and it kind of puts them into a situation to where that they're darned if they do, they're darned if they don't, and you don't really want to have that happening to them. But there are some things within law enforcement that absolutely need to change. Qualified immunity needs to go out the window. You need to ban internal reviews of misconduct. Law enforcement should not be able to investigate themselves for misconduct. Absolutely not. That needs to stop, because things get swept under the rug. It's not brought to public light, and there's mistrust within law enforcement when you have that happen. Those things should be delegated to a third-party agency. Maybe you send that off, and so just like the DA office is going to handle a public case, then you're going to have somebody else handle that internal review for law enforcement. And speaking of DA, you need to stop the funding between law enforcement and their unions. You need to get their unions out of funding the DA's offices. There should not be, I understand that they work together, but there should not be a financial tie between those two offices, because whenever they don't engage law enforcement, it just seems shady, and we need to change those things.
You made the comparison to JAG in the military as an external review board.
Yes, so the way that JAG offices work in military is JAG does not answer to anyone on the base. The commander for the base cannot influence JAG whatsoever whenever they're dealing with judicial punishment in cases, because their entire chain of command is outside of that system. So it prevents from any tampering and anyone getting away with something that they really shouldn't. So I think that law enforcement needs to have the same thing. If law enforcement personnel are supposed to enforce the law, yes, they need to also obey the law, but you can't rely on them to be the ones to enforce themselves. There needs to be another agency to do that, because otherwise, where's their balance to say that you're going to be held accountable? It's not going to happen. You tell a 5-year-old to babysit himself, what is the 5-year-old going to do? They're going to do whatever they want. And I'm not saying that all cops are like that. By far, none cops are not like that. But when you have those few that are able to get away with things, it makes all of them look bad. And then when the other ones are not stepping in to police each other, then you're having a larger problem. So taking away the responsibility of enforcing laws on themselves and rules and regulations away from them and having somebody else do that is going to have sweeping changes within law enforcement.
Exactly.
I know we're moving on time, but Leslie, I thought I saw your hand come up on this.
You're muted, Leslie.
Is that better now?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. A lot of what you guys are saying has an economic base to it. And one of the problems in this country that we're now addressing is economic development in the African American community. There's a lot of studies, the data shows that if more economic opportunities were open to minorities, it would reduce crime. There's so many other social issues that it would reduce that has an economic base to it. We wouldn't have issues with parents having 2-3 jobs, which can go back to be linked to institutional racism, not given proper opportunities. So this country has to be more inclusive when it comes to economic development. And the problem is that there needs to not be considered a merchant class and a buyer's class in a sense. The African American community is considered too much as buyers instead of manufacturers, instead of owning their own stores in their neighborhoods and so forth like that. So everyone, a lot of companies study the spending habits of African Americans. We spend $1.3 trillion a year. We're making everybody millionaires besides ourselves. So until the government comes up with a plan to be more inclusive when it comes to capital, making more capital accessible to African American businesses. I mean, you guys just think about just the other day, a couple of years ago, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, a lot of these banks were sued because they disproportionately denied African American business loans, and not just business loans, but loans to buy homes. And we all know home ownership is another avenue to economic independence. So economics plays a big role in basically so much of what's being discussed this evening. And if that changes and it becomes more inclusive, a lot of these social issues would be resolved.
Leslie, you make a really great point. I don't know if any of you have seen the video that was going around. A friend of mine shared it actually in one of the discussions on my Facebook page, and it was a young woman talking about the destruction that was taking place in her community. And she basically was sharing the frustration about the community members themselves don't own anything in that community. They don't own the stores. They don't own the homes. They don't own the they don't own the businesses. They don't own anything. And so that lack of ownership contributed to, it seemed as though the lack of ownership contributed to some of the violence we've seen break out. We're going to be good stewards of our time, and I'm going to try to keep us on track. We're going to move on to the third question, unless somebody wants to add anything else.
Yeah, I was just, it's interesting talking about this and this coming up about Black ownership. There's a song, there's a lyric in a song called Reagan by Killer Mike. I don't know if you guys know who that is.
I know Killer Mike.
Oh, yeah?
I have no idea who that is, but
he says in the song, he says, "We brag on having bread, but none of us are bakers. We all talk having greens, but none of us own acres." And I heard that when I was a little kid, like in middle school. I was like, dang, that's crazy. And and a lot of these problems that we face would not be problems if there was more Black ownership. You look in these poor communities, look at the liquor stores. Who owns all the gas stations? Who owns all the liquor stores? None of these, it's not Black people. Plenty of people from different countries that come up here with their own credit lines. They already have their money, like they save up and work in their communities to have these businesses to keep that wealth going. You look at Black people as a whole in America, there's no generational wealth. And we have to look at the history, like, why is that? Because a lot of people like to try to say, oh, Black people are lazy, you just have to work hard and do all this. But that's saying that blind. You know what I'm saying? You're blinded for saying that, because you have to look at the history. Why is there such a lack of Black ownership? Why has this country pacified the Black community so hard, where we're the top consumers?
So I know Dr. King is going to absolutely wring my neck right now if he could reach through the screen, but I want to unpack this a little bit, if that's okay with everybody, because I can hear in the back of my head, because I've got a wide spectrum of friends, and I'm hearing in the back of my head, well, what is stopping? Let's dive into that a little bit, right? To explain to the people who might be watching that are saying to themselves, well, what's stopping you? What's the issue, right? I mean, I know that we all know that there are some issues, but there are people that will be watching this that will be saying, well, my family came over here off the boat with not a dime in their pocket and they started this business or that business. And it's not belittling their family's efforts, but I think this is a valuable opportunity to take a little bit of a deeper dive, a little bit of a drift away from the questions we have, but to really unpack this a little bit for the benefit of those who might be watching. Anybody want to?
Ken had his hand raised.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and one of the things I've heard over the years, and I mean, I grew up in segregated schools and all. I was born in 48. So, we had segregated schools as I was growing up. And I can remember clearly that my uncle had a grocery store. My great aunt had a grocery store. We had cousins that had barbers. During segregation, Black people own a lot of businesses. You think about Black Wall Street, and you think about the different institutions, hotels, and different kinds of businesses that Black people actually own. And then I heard a friend of mine say one day, he says, to a degree, one of the worst things that happened to Black people was integration.
Wow.
Because once that happened, we lost the ability to some degree, maybe become complacent, because we didn't have to provide those businesses for ourselves. We could not go to movie theaters. We could not go to hotels. I was explaining to one of my friends today, we never took vacations when I was growing up, because if you drove across country, you'd have to sleep in the car. There was no place to stay. The only vacations we had was when we went to visit relatives because we had a place to stay. So I'm looking back and I'm thinking about, well, why is it now that we have these problems? A lot of it goes back to institutional racism. A lot of it is just racism in general, because the banks and many other community institutions have made it very difficult for Black people to actually own businesses, to get loans, to acquire that wealth. And we see that in existence today even. I mean, you think about some of the things, and I know some people look at me sometimes, and I mean, I collect cars and all, and they say, well, what do you do? And I got tired of that, and I says, well, first of all, I don't do drugs, and I'm not a retired athlete. I went to college, and I got an education, and I worked. So, you still have that stigma that is attached to Black people in general about possibly being lazy or inability to actually be smart to run businesses and these kinds of things here. Right. So that still sticks out there, and that's still existing right now.
Yes. Anybody else, Tim? Oh, you're muted.
Neelan had a hand up.
No, Ken hit it all real quick. And one of the things is it goes back to one of the things I talked about earlier, redlining. Those inability for people to obtain loans to start businesses. And I don't really want to dive too much into it, but there is a school to prison pipeline that's still going on there, where prisons are making money off of people being in jail. And there's no way for people to better themselves when they're in prison. There's no reform. They get in, they get served their time, they get out, they go right back to the same things that they were doing before, because there is no way for them to actually better themselves.
Well, it's very important, I think, for people to know that they've privatized the prison system.
Yep.
And so there's a financial incentive to,
Absolutely.
Also keep people locked up. I'm going to drop a couple of references for those who might be watching. A few documentaries on Netflix or Amazon Prime. One is called 13. It's about the 13th Amendment, but talks about how that clause in the 13th Amendment, which basically you lose all of those rights if you are a criminal, if you are a convicted criminal. And the documentary does a really phenomenal job sharing how right after the Emancipation Proclamation and how the 13th Amendment was signed after that, how then, if you were loitering, if you were jaywalking, if for whatever small, minuscule, crime that might have been committed, you were then arrested. African Americans were arrested and then would work a chain gang, or basically it was, another form of slavery, if you will. And
don't forget about, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's a great documentary. I recommend watching it because it walks you through the history starting back then, but it walks you right through to today. And you can see how the mass incarceration is part of a larger strategy. Yep. And how it's impacted the African-American community. So just a great documentary to make sure that people, if they're really trying to broaden their perspective, take the moment to watch.
Just
Don't
one
forget
thing.
about how they're.
No, I was going to say, I just finished a book called The New Jim Crow, and it talks about those things right explicitly as what you're talking about.
Yes.
The New Jim Crow.
Just one thing I want to throw in there. You can't forget about the stuff that the Nixon administration did, where they specifically went after the Black communities, where they
Southern
went after
strategy.
the gays, the hippies, and then you can't forget about COINTELPRO, wherever they went specifically after the Black Panther, even though the Black Panther Party was the ones who started the free lunch for kids program. So you have those different things that people really need to look up. I'm going to drop a link in here. It's a short little video on YouTube that talks about institutional racism and how things go from and just the flow of it, so people can take a look at that. It's really informative, and it actually uses Michael Jackson's song "They Don't Care About Us" as a reference to understanding what's going on, the practices that are still going on.
I think what a lot of people need to realize too is that the system of racism has evolved so much as time has gone on, and as technology has evolved and people have gotten smarter. I think people fail to realize how effectively they've had time to work on it. Because now it's to the point where it's so subtle, you could think that racism doesn't exist. And really, it's so much there in little ways that were built upon for decades and decades, where they've successfully tricked people into thinking that there are no issues anymore. But really, they're really right in our face. You just have to wake up and really look into it.
Thank you for that, Enosh, and thank you, Dr. King, for letting me kind of go off script for a minute. But I know we got to get to question 3.
You're good. Let Leslie finish his thought.
Yeah, no. MLK says it great when he says that, and this was really prior to them, him being killed, and that was, a lot of times it is said to the African American community, well, why don't you pull yourself up from your bootstraps? Mm. And I don't know if you remember this statement, but MLK says, well, how do you expect us to pull ourselves up from our bootstraps when we never had boots? We were never given boots. So I say that to say that a lot of Europeans, a lot of non-African Americans, that is, and you can put them in whatever classification you want to, earlier on in this country's history, they were given land grants and they were given so many things to help them economically, okay? And it was promised to the African Americans who worked for free to build this country, 40 acres and a mule, and we all know what happened with that. So when you say to a community, pull yourselves from your bootstraps, and you never gave them any boots, it's really sad that that a lot of whites are not sympathetic and understanding and showing more empathy towards that particular community that had a lot to do with building this country.
You'll see a lot of people try to say, just try to, why do you have that victim mindset? Why don't you, like you said, why don't you pick yourself up from your bootstraps? And they just fail to realize, not saying that it's okay to just, stay in that mindset as a victim, because you can get yourself up out of those situations, but failure to understand why they're there in the first place.
Absolutely.
Doesn't lead to anything.
Okay, thank you both for that. I'm going to go on to question 3. Okay, gang. Where can you find allies and support within our existing community or by reaching out to others? We had some really interesting conversations around this question last night. And I believe, Enosh, we'll start with you. You want me to repeat the question?
Yeah. Say it again.
Where can you find allies and support within our existing community or by reaching out to others?
In life, not everybody is going to stand up for what's right away. It takes one person, at least one person, one voice to speak out on what they, hold on, sorry. Can you hear them in the background? Okay, hold on.
Ken,
I'll
can you hop in?
Yeah, I think that one of the things you can do as far as finding allies is working with your law enforcement officers, those that are really good guys and, you know, they want to basically help. Also, talking to friends. I mean, non-Black friends or just people in general. You need to talk about it in order to be able to have a good discussion and have a dialogue so that people understand what's going on. You know, like the discussion I had with a gentleman this morning, and just the discussion I had last week with a friend. And these are friends that I've known for a while, but we've never really talked about race. We never talked about the things that are going on in the country now. But once you start opening up that dialogue, then I think you start establishing allies, individuals that understand how you feel and why you feel the way that you do. And they're not afraid to talk. They're not afraid to talk to you. Also, I think, you know, one of the things that I've done is getting involved in the community. You know, when I first ran for commissioner of Flagler Beach, I had no idea that I was the first person of color that ever ran for Flagler Beach. But then I said, well, why didn't individuals ever do it? And they said, well, they were always afraid to, didn't think they would win anyway. So it's a matter of getting out there and, again, getting involved with the community, talking to people, getting involved, building up those allies, and then letting folks know that, you know, you are out there, you're willing to talk to people, and you know, you're not the boogie bear, the bad guy, the guy that is harboring a lot of anger. One of the things that you often hear a lot of people say, and they say it in particular about African American, is, and you'll hear people say it innocently. He says, "Wow, he's very articulate." And you say, okay, well, what does that mean? Why is it that I'm articulate, but you hear someone else speak and they're not, you don't use that same phrase. So, you know, but then you understand, well, why did you say that? And you can discuss it. And that's where you start building up allies.
You're muted, Colleen.
No, I'm sorry. There was noise in my background. You know, I was trying to quiet my house down. But thank you for that, Ken.
All right, Enosh, you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much hit on the head. It just takes a lot of speaking out and making yourself vulnerable, you know, because people respond to vulnerability. They see that you're really putting an effort forth to really like communicate and just connect with them. And what I was saying how, you know, not everybody is bold enough or brave enough to stand up on their own if they don't see other people standing up with them. So like I said, you just gotta put yourself out there. You gotta stick your leg out and just try to stand up for what's right and speak up on what you believe. Because the people that are like-minded, they will be drawn towards you, or you guys are gonna draw towards each other.
And that's kind of what you talked about last night, was building your community.
Exactly. And I feel like that's something that people especially have to do, because not to bring names into it, but you look at, you know, people that the Trump's followers, they easily swarm together. And you have to, I mean, to an extent, you can admire that because they all believe a certain thing and they all easily come together, ready to rally together. So why is that so hard for people that just want change? You know what I mean? So it takes a village.
Dr. King, you want to, thanks Enosh for that. Dr. King, you want to go on to 4?
Yep. So but before we move on, just piggybacking on this conversation, everyone has an obligation to do their part. And you can't sit back and say, well, I'm not going to move until somebody else does. You have to start taking the initiative, start introducing these conversations, as painful, as uncomfortable, as difficult as they may be. You're obligated for the betterment of our society to sit down and look at people who are different from you and really try to understand. John hit it on the head earlier in our conversation. Knowing who people are, where they come from, what does these different cultures mean and represent is going to be really, really important. Our last question of the night is, how might we re-envision racial problems as an opportunity to work together and create the society that we want, one that reflects our deepest values? I'm going to drop that into the chat pod there. And we will start this one out with Nealon.
One of the things I think that we can really re-envision. So what problem that we have right now and flip the script on it is diversity, expanding diversity programs to create opportunities for minorities to move into the entire spectrum of careers. What I really mean is representation matters so much, and the fact that we aren't seeing a full spectrum of representation everywhere. How long did it take for us to have a first Black president? Does that mean that for all the years that America's existed that we haven't had a Black person who was capable of being president? No, that's not saying it at all. And you see that we're slowly having things progress. You look at Congress, the Congress we have right now is the most diverse it's ever been, but you're still not seeing a full spectrum of people overall within Congress. You see almost all lawyers and legal studies, that's it. You don't see doctors, you don't see farmers, you don't see small business owners. You need to see all that stuff out there in every shape and form so people can get an idea that's not, we're not pigeonholing ourselves to who people are. I don't want somebody to look at me and think that I'm, your run-of-the-mill stereotypical African-American male. So I'm not. I'm West Indian. My whole family comes from Trinidad and Tobago. So when you look at me and understanding more people who are from where I'm from and seeing that to the forefront, you're going to have change. I didn't have a lot of minority teachers growing up. I can count on both hands the number of people I had. 3 Black teachers, 2 Asian, 6 Hispanics. I know because I looked through my yearbooks, but I didn't have that. And you need to see those people. You see everyone highly visible, working hand in hand together everywhere. It needs to be a blend.
Good. Panelists, anybody else want to talk about how do we, Ken, thank you.
Yeah, I think that what we're doing right now actually is a very good tool to re-envision the racial issues that we have right now. If you don't talk about it, then you're not going to address the problem. You're not going to come to any kind of conclusions on how to remedy the situation that we have. And it's just like any problem that you have in a marriage or anywhere else. If you don't address the problem and recognize that there are some differences and some issues that we need to address, then you'll never actually resolve it. You'll never actually come together. So talking, having these kinds of discussions and just putting it out there, I think is a very good way of re-envisioning what we're doing right now and the kinds of problems we're having. I mean, you're looking across the country right now, and you're looking at all of the protests that are going on, and some of the crowds have more whites than Blacks. And you'll say, well, why? What's going on? Well, they're stepping out there and they're understanding, there are some real problems that we have in our country and we really need to come together. So those are the kinds of things that I think are very good, and you can look at those as a very good thing. Some people think that the protests and the marches are bad, but that's something that we need to continue to do so that they can actually understand that there is a positive side to it. Some people will never ever change. That's just part of their DNA. And we have to accept that as well. So we just move on to the individuals that we can talk to and we can solve some problems with, in my opinion, anyway.
Ms. Carmen last night shared, and talked about, while we may not want to always engage in those conversations for the fear of offending someone, that it's really important that we engage in honest conversations, and that we challenge each other and not just accept it or walk away, but try to understand both sides. And one of the things that came up last night, just to throw out there and touch on again, was, that both sides take the time to try to understand each other, that it's not just understanding the perspective of African Americans, but for African Americans and minorities to understand, where is this coming from? Where is this? When people are feeling a certain way, it's not enough to just say either they're just racist or they're, we have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to try to understand each other. And that's a two-way street, not just a one-way street, right? And I know that, John, I think you just talked. I'm so sorry, my dog is just having a blast.
I want to say something, if you get it.
We'll go with John, and then we'll go with
I think
Leslie.
Ken was trying to say something. Was it Ken?
No, I'm okay. Go ahead, John.
Well, it starts with us individually. Like I said, it starts with us and accountability. This is not an elephant or a donkey problem. It's an American problem that the politicians, they don't have the answers. Okay, the Democrats don't have the answers. The Republicans don't have the answers. Okay, and I just think that if we treat everyone like we want to be treated, the golden rule, do unto others as you want done to you. I think that's where it starts. It starts with us getting to know our neighbors, and just we as a country, Second Chronicles 7:14 says, "If my people who are called by my name," and we're all child of God, and we're called by my name, will humble themselves, and that's us humbling ourselves and praying and turning from our wicked ways, and then we will hear from heaven, and God will heal our land. And I think that it starts with us, but we can't do it without the help of God, without the power of the cross. I don't think we could do it. And I just think that I said it. We all came to this great country in different ships, but we're in the same boat now, and that's to save our kids, save our grandkids, make it better for the next that's up and coming. Try to make it easier for them. And I just want to again say thank you for having this discussion, and it needed to be done. And I just appreciate every one of you guys and Colleen for having me on here with you all tonight.
Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Appreciate you. I appreciate the way you brought in the spiritual aspect to it, because that's where that's really the ultimate answer to this whole dilemma that we're in right now. Because once we get to the realization that God created man in his image, he didn't create races as we divided up today. He created man. And until we get to the realization that we are all brothers and sisters, and once we understand that and start treating each other like we are actually blood relatives, and understanding that just like you would do good to one brother or another relative or another friend, that is also expected of you to how you should relate and deal with everyone else, that they may have a different skin color than you, but they're still your brother, then you're still your sister. So I think it's very hard to legislate certain behavior, but I think that this is an opportunity, as the question says. I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to look at themselves and to re-examine some of their fundamental beliefs and their thoughts, and how some of their biases that they're not fully aware of, and if some of these biases are faulty, if some of these biases are harmful to other people. So I think this is a great opportunity for everyone to really understand that we're all brothers and sisters. As you said, John, we're all in this together. And we need each other to solve this problem, because if we don't solve the problem, the true enemy is right now laughing at us all. We're all being played. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but it's the truth. There's a master plan for us to be at each other the way we are right now. And it shouldn't be that way. So this is a great opportunity for us to understand that, if we're believers, God created man in his image. We're all related. We need to treat each other with love and understanding. And just as much as we give one an opportunity to be successful, we need to give the other. We need to be more inclusive in our economic development approach, and not feel that the African American community oh, we don't have to worry about that. You know, we need them to be where they're at. So this way they can, you know, solve the privatized jail system. You know, I used to tell young men, and I still tell young men this right now. I tell them, I says, you know what? You're going to be money is going to be made from you one way or the other. So you have a choice of either controlling that or you have a choice of not. But one way or the other, there's going to be money made from you. So you can make it or somebody else can make it on you. And you guys know what I mean when I say that. Okay. So you're either going to get an education, start a business, start to be a productive citizen in the society, or you're going to go to one of those privatized jails, and they're going to make around $80 to $100,000 off of you for the year. Think about it. You know, so you know we really have to look at this in a holistic sense, and see this as an opportunity for all of us to understand that, you know what, if we continue on this unsustainable pattern that we're on, it's going to be destructive for everyone. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank you again, John, for being brave enough to be on a part of this panelist. And it starts, like you guys said, it starts by a conversation. You know, it starts by this conversation for us to get together and speak about how do we move forward.
Leslie, and Enoch, you know, you mentioned Killer Mike from Atlanta, but there was another great songwriter years ago. His name was Andre Crouch, and he wrote the song that says, Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him, there's no other. And, you know, and that is what we're going to have to turn to. I think, you know, throughout all this chaos and all this satanic activity, I think we're going to see an outpouring of God like we've never seen before. I think there's going to be a revival that hits across this nation from sea to shining sea. And I think that, you know, we're going to see an outpouring of the Holy Spirit on this land.
I have to agree with you. I think we all could use that right about now. So I know that we've had an opportunity to kind of get through our 4 questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. And I think it would be really wonderful if we could maybe grab some of the questions from the audience. Dr. King has been populating them in the Google Doc. And so why don't we go ahead, Tim, and jump into some of those questions. And these are questions from the audience.
Hold on, I think Mr. Ken wanted to say something before.
Yeah, Ken had one more comment.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just wrap it up. I was just going to say that I think what's really going on right now is that there's a heightened, and I call it heightened level of anxiety, anger, impatience that's, you know, just basically permeating our entire country. A lot of it is brought on by social media. And I think that we all, I mean, everyone needs to just basically drop it down a few notches, step back, take a breath, and do some of the things that we're talking about right now. I mean, everyone on edge is causing a lot of anxiety, and a lot of what we see happening is as a result of people just not listening to each other. They express themselves on social media, and, you know, they're not willing to confront people, as far as not confronting, but actually talking to people in real life anymore. So, you know, that is missing. And as a result, you know, people will say things on the keyboard that they would never, ever think about saying to someone in person.
Yeah,
So if we could just kind of get away from a little bit of that, I think that we could really do a lot as far as helping to bridge the gaps that we see in our society right now.
Yeah, you know, somebody reached out to me, and I see in the chat box, you know, about being inclusive of the conversation. It's certainly, you know, not just about one religion. It really is about developing that empathy and that understanding and that tolerance, and ethics, of course, go along with all of that. So the first question and thank you for sharing that. The first question from our audience, if that's okay to dive in, gentlemen. I'm wondering if anyone can address if you felt the various environments you have experienced allowed you to thrive. And if not, what specifically can be addressed to change in those environments? So if you were in an environment that you felt really supported and helped you thrive, what was it about that environment? And the ones that did not, what could be changed about those environments? That's a great question.
I'll start.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, I like I said, I was born in 1948. I was born on my grandparents' sharecroppers farm in North Carolina. And I look back at some of the photographs and all now when I was a little teeny boy on, it was a tobacco and cotton and this kind of thing here. And some of the things that I remember very clearly is the support that I got from my grandparents, my parents, went to Catholic schools, and I got the support from the nuns and these individuals here. And I think those are the kinds of things that need to be in a lot of people's lives from the time you're very small to adult life, or even up through your puberty. Those are the kind of support things I think that really helps a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, anybody else? Nealon, supports that you acknowledge maybe growing up that you had in the various environments, or ones that were missing that you really wish were there?
In the military, the Air Force just came out with a review that they found that minorities, specifically Black men, were found to be punished more often and more severely. I never really felt that when I first joined the military. I grew up in a very inclusive neighborhood. My everything from school, my churches, everyone, it was a very well diverse neighborhood. Going into the military, coming in and experiencing people who have never been around a Black person and being the only Black person and for miles in some of the places that I was in, I think that those locations allowed me to thrive because people changed their perceptions about what they thought a Black man was when they got a chance to meet me and be in those situations. I also did sort of feel discriminated against because people do have those pre-notions of what they think a Black man is, but being able to shatter those stereotypes and those norms, specifically because the way I talk and how I carry myself, like, oh, you're not really Black. I'm like, that's really an insult if you don't know that. I don't talk white. That's not it. It's proper English, and everyone does that. So being in the military, I did have some challenges. It wasn't necessarily a fully thriving, environment that was conducive to me at all times, but it did help me thrive and shatter those norms for people and expand with what they really thought a person could be.
No, Colleen, I think that when you have opportunities as a Black man, most of your opportunities are presented in a white world, and you rise and you fall based on your ability to connect with those folks and those folks to support you. So some environments that I've been in, I thought that I would thrive. It didn't work out that way because there wasn't support. There are other environments that looked exactly the same, and there were people there who didn't care that I was a Black guy. They cared that I was a good guy, and hey, we're going to push you and we're going to support you, and you thrive. So it's really getting in an environment where people see your content and your character, and they value that. And you get in those kind of environments, you typically can rise. You become the best version of yourself in those environments.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. Enosh, sorry. What do you think? Do you have any an environment that you felt really allowed you to thrive?
I'm sorry, say one more time.
An environment that you felt really allowed you to thrive, or an environment that didn't allow you to thrive, and what would you recommend be changed?
That's a really good question.
Well, we won't put you on the spot. We'll let you think about it.
Because there's a lot of layers to it. I'm trying to put it together. But go ahead. It'll come back to me.
Leslie, were you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And Tim, I think we can recall what I mentioned about that environment to thrive, and what some of the things that we can do about that environment. And now I'm gonna relate back to the study that was done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation when they studied the teacher to a student ratios when it comes to racial makeup of our teaching throughout our educational system in the United States. And they did a study, and at the end of the study showed that, and it was the sample sizes were varied. I think it was San Francisco and another state that they did the study. But at the end of the study, it surprised the professor that had the study from NYU. And basically they found out that through the questionnaires, they found that the majority of students, and this has to do with inclusion and the cultural makeup of teachers in the United States in this education system. They found that the majority of students, including white students, preferred the minority teachers. So basically the study showed that if educational systems had a more inclusive teaching environment, it would increase the graduation rate, and it would be more supportive of the minorities that in some cases had a negative experience by having a disproportionate amount of African-American or minority teachers to their teaching experience. And Nolan, he actually, made a comment on that as well. So, I think that is the beginning of creating an environment, a better environment, a more inclusive environment for our students and for our educational system. Because a lot of times, a lot of students have bad experiences, and sometimes it dwarfs their career long term because they had a bad teacher. I mean, just think about it. We could have had a lot of doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs or whatever if they never had a bad experience
Right.
in the education system.
Right. That goes for all children, right?
All children.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Leslie. I think, Dr. King, we're coming down to the wire here. We're going to have
We
to
are.
start.
We are. We're at a wrap up place.
Flew by.
So we're thankful for you joining us tonight, all of our panelists. Thank you. I do want to note, and Colleen, you can help clarify this. Colleen and I each week work to try to pull together a diverse panel. We weren't as successful as we wanted to be every week. We believe that the more diverse our panel is, the better the voices and outcomes will be. And so again, we do thank John for joining us tonight. There are others who wanted to join but had conflicts. I know there have been some requests to add additional conversations, and those are likely to move forward with some additional conversations. I think this has been good for us all. Colleen, I'll turn it over to you.
I just want to thank all of you tonight for participating. And yes, the conversation kind of came up last night. I think Leslie, jokingly was like, "Hey, you're the only, we're the rest of the white people." And we made sure to get you in the gallery view so that you could see John, and John has been wonderful and gracious in attending. And Dr. King is exactly right. We've reached out, and we build the panel each week, and we've reached out to a number of individuals, and there are quite a few that had scheduling conflicts, but there was also this worry of participating, this worry of engaging in a dialogue or a conversation and saying the wrong thing. People that are very well-meaning, that want to engage in these kinds of conversations, but they are so afraid of offending someone or saying the wrong thing. And I love the way Dr. King always starts our panel discussion out, that we are going to have grace with each other, and that we would really encourage all of us moving forward to engage people that are not like who you are, reach out to the person that maybe looks a little bit different than you and have that conversation without any kind of defensiveness. I love, Ken, tonight that you shared so many examples of conversations taking place and friends asking you questions. I think we have to be brave enough to ask honest questions and engage in conversations that are uncomfortable, because that's how we grow. Through pain comes growth if we take the time. We have been asked, multiple people, we're very grateful for those comments, have asked to keep the conversations going. And so Dr. King and I are going to continue to have that conversation and try to figure out, you know, how exactly we do that. But for the panelists tonight, I can't thank you enough, each one of you. The conversation has been so rich. Last night, the conversation was rich. I want to give a shout out to Carmen. Hope she's feeling better. Hope that we were able to represent some of her thoughts tonight in this panel discussion. Kind of felt a little lonely being the only woman on board tonight. But it's been a joy. And if anyone has any thing else, we'll close it out. We've been trying to honor people's time and keep it to an hour and 15 minutes. But other than that, you've all been a joy. We wish you well. And thank you for participating in tonight's discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Have
it.
a great night, everybody. Thank you.
You too.